The dust of Dry Creek Territory, Wyoming, was less a nuisance and more an unwelcome, permanent resident. It coated the tongue with the taste of pulverized brick and settled on everything June Mallory owned, from the gingham curtains of the kitchen to the tight, stubborn knot in her father's ledgers. It was the late 1880s, and this part of the High Plains was entering its third year of serious drought. The water table had dropped so low the wells groaned like dying cattle, and the promise of the new rail line, which sliced a greedy path 20 miles north, had only served to whip up land prices and the local anxiety to a frenzy. June, standing by the small, scarred counter of Mallory's diner, didn't look like the typical frail heroine of the dime novels. She was ample, the kind of woman whose strength was evident in the rounded, capable turn of her shoulders and the firm set of her jaw. She was built for endurance, not for fainting. Her hands, dusted perpetually with flour from the morning's labor, were quick and clever, able to flip 3 pancakes at once or soothe a fretful baby with equal dexterity. June knew her worth, even if the meaner elements of Dry Creek were quick to point out that her silhouette was not the fashion. Her dream, meticulously sketched in pencil on the back of a discarded flour sack, was to expand the diner into a proper way station, a place called the Coyote Well Kitchen and Lodge near the dusty stagecoach stop, offering travelers not just food, but the blessed solace of a clean bed and a truly great, honest loaf of sourdough. Every dawn, before the first customer tracked red dust across the porch, June was tending her starter dough, a dense, living symbol of hope, demanding patience and faith to rise. "A man who can't pay for his coffee shouldn't complain about the sugar," June murmured, polishing the tin sugar dispenser until it shone despite the gloom outside. She wasn't talking about a customer. She was talking about her father's health, the debt accumulating like dust in the corners, and the vast, smothering presence of Baron Ezra Pike. Ezra Pike, owner of the sprawling Black Pike Ranch, was the nearest thing Dry Creek had to a local king, his crown jewel. The one thing that kept his ranch functioning while others withered was the Coyote Well. It wasn't the biggest, but it was deep, pure, and Pike had, over the last 10 years, slowly and systematically assumed control over its main flow and the access to it. It was the absolute pivot of justice and survival in this parched land. And Pike held the lever. The sun beat down with the heavy, disinterested brutality of a blacksmith's hammer. Outside, the town was a scattering of buildings: the white-steepled church, the raucous, necessary saloon run by Ma Hollis, the inert sheriff's office, and the livery stable, currently the domain of Cade Foster. Cade Foster was a seasonal cowboy, working this year for Pike's outfit, though he kept his distance from the Baron himself. Cade was quiet, tall, and moved with the unhurried efficiency of a coiled spring. He could gentle a panicked Mustang with a soft word and an iron patience, and he was known to be faster than lightning with a pistol, though he never practiced or carried unless he was riding far out. His past, like the territory west of the river, was vague. A few years spent drifting out of Kansas, a few stories Ma Hollis occasionally hinted at concerning a matter of principle and a poorly paid debt. Cade lived by a simple, self-imposed code that was often a burden: pay your debts, even the intangible ones, and when a strong hand comes down on a weaker neck, you step in. He was currently at the livery stable, replacing a worn stirrup on a heavy work saddle, his focus absolute. Beside him, hunched over a pile of clean leather scraps, was Rory, an orphan boy Cade had informally taken under his wing, teaching him the gentle brutality of the horse trade. "They say Pike is offering a lot of money for those 3 lots by the church," Rory observed. His voice hushed, as if Pike could hear through the dust. Cade didn't look up. "Pike offers money for anything he can't take for free, son, and he usually gets it. Finish stitching that seam. It's pulling." The ecosystem of Dry Creek revolved around this quiet tension. Sheriff Doyle, a man whose spine had been softened by years of taking Pike's favors, spent his days shuffling papers and avoiding conflict. Ma Hollis, however, the saloon keeper, was the town's nervous system, knowing every debt, every secret, and every potential fracture line. June's friend, Letty, the quick-witted seamstress, was the only person who spoke her mind to June without fear of consequence. June chose that moment to walk over to the livery, carrying a covered tray. Her father had always insisted on feeding the hands, even when the books were bleeding red. The afternoon dust devil, a spiral of red earth, danced across the barren prairie before dissolving into the wind, symbolizing the chaotic, blinding power that could sweep through Dry Creek at any moment. Cade looked up as June approached. The light caught the deep gold in her hair, and he noticed, as he often did, the effortless grace in her strong stride. She wore a simple dark dress, and her face, despite the heat, was flushed with a natural vitality. "I brought you the last of the apricot buns," June announced, setting the tray on a clean barrel head. "My father is complaining that the yeast is getting too hot to work properly, so enjoy it while the leaven lasts." Cade stripped off his leather gloves, his hands calloused and clean. "Miss June, you're too good to us. Your father could sell these for a day's worth of water right now." "A day's worth of water buys nothing if you're too hungry to work," June countered, her voice rich with a practical humor that Cade appreciated. "Besides, I need your expertise." On what the proper angle for a horseshoe, or the market value of a decent apron? June leaned an elbow on the barrel, her eyes meeting his, a direct, intelligent gaze. "On Mr. Pike, I heard you're riding out to help him encourage some small landholders to sell up near the stage stop. Is that true?" The air tightened slightly, the easy atmosphere abruptly replaced by the dust of an unwanted truth. Cade picked up a bun, examining the golden-brown crust before taking a slow bite. "My job is to drive cattle for the Black Pike outfit," Cade said, carefully. "My contracts are with the cattle, not the land." "And the rumor about the stagecoach land?" Cade chewed, his eyes distant for a moment, remembering the piece of paper he'd signed a boilerplate clause that mentioned assisting in land consolidation. He hadn't thought twice about it. He needed the seasonal pay. "Rumors run quicker than water in Dry Creek. Miss June, don't listen to half of what you hear." June wasn't fooled. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. "But the other half is true." She pressed, "Look, I have a dream. Cade, I want a proper way station. I need the land near that stage stop, but Pike is moving like a shadow. And if he cuts us off from the last of the runoff water, the town is finished." "It's finished anyway. Miss June, if this drought holds," Cade said, his tone still professional, but softer now. "You need to think about yourself. Self-reliance is all I have. Cade, and dignity." She paused, the sunlight catching the stubborn determination in her face. "My father always told me the greatest injustice isn't the scarcity of water, but the scarcity of principle." Cade wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, a small, genuine smile curving his lips, the first flicker of something deeper passing between them, a recognition of shared grit. "You talk like a man who's been cheated one time too many, Miss June. And you talk like a man who's done the cheating one time too many, Mr. Foster, but I don't believe that second part." The easy wit was a shield, but it was also a spark. Their conversations were never about the weather. They were tight, multi-layered exchanges that hinted at the psychological depths they both guarded. June knew Cade had scars, not all of them visible. Cade saw in June a spirit too bright, too generous, and too exposed for the harsh reality of the Wyoming territory. She was baking hope into every loaf, and Pike was ready to starve the yeast. Rory approached, carrying a neatly tied bundle of clean saddle soap. "Mr. Cade, I saw one of Pike's men, Miles, looking around the town well again, just standing there, watching the pulley." Cade nodded, his expression darkening slightly. The town well was distinct from the private coyote well, but it was fed by the same dropping aquifer. "Thank you. Rory, go wash up. Tell your sister I said to stop by for some of those famous apricot buns," June said, gently correcting the boy's fear with domestic focus. Rory scurried off. "Miles and Rook," June continued, naming two of Pike's most notorious enforcers, lumbering men with flat, empty eyes. "They're testing the boundaries. Everyone knows Pike wants our little piece of land because it sits right on the old wagon trail. Perfect for his expanded operation once the railway gets closer." "If you fight Pike on the land, he'll fight you on the water," Cade warned, his gaze sweeping the horizon where the red dust clouds were beginning to gather force for the evening swirl. The red dust was the metaphor for everything Pike represented: the opacity of brawling power, the tyranny that blinded and choked the small landholders. June picked up her empty tray. "And if I don't fight him, I lose the only thing my father has left, and I lose my future. I've always been told that love won't come to a woman with my build, that I need to be smaller, quieter, less much. I figured if I'm going to be too much for the world, I might as well be too much of a problem for Ezra Pike." Cade watched her, a strange mixture of admiration and protective instinct rising within him. He didn't offer platitudes or easy compliments. He offered a simple truth, rooted in the hard earth. "The Lord makes us what we are, Miss June. What matters is what we do with the strength we're given. And you've got a rare kind of strength." June gave a curt nod, a signal that the conversation was done. But the connection wasn't. It was the tight structure of their personalities, two people who said little but meant much. Back inside the diner, the walls seemed to sigh under the afternoon heat. June went to her pantry, checking the level of the rainwater barrels her father had set up years ago low, dangerously low. She looked at the small, dark earthen pot where her starter dough rested, warm and hopeful. It was the only thing in Dry Creek that consistently kept its promise to rise. That evening, the tension hook tightened. Ma Hollis shuffled into the diner, wiping sweat from her brow, looking agitated. "June," Ma Hollis whispered, leaning close over the counter. "Heard it from one of Pike's stable boys. Ezra is telling everyone that anyone who holds land near the stage road is defying him. He's going to make an example of someone. He said he's going to make them thirst until they sign over the deed for a nickel." June felt a chill despite the heat. Her father was frail. Their diner was the most visible. Independent target near the planned way station, the Coyote Well, the symbol of common resource, was about to become the instrument of private oppression. She looked out the window toward the livery, seeing Cade Foster silhouetted against the dusty, fading light, leading his tired horse to water. The simple scene suggested a man who belonged to the earth, independent and unattached. But June had already seen the principle beneath the saddle leather. She knew that sooner or later. His code would put him on the wrong side of Ezra Pike, and she hoped, selfishly, that when that day came, he would be standing by her side. The slow, dusty pace of Part 1 had established the landscape and the characters' internal battlegrounds, June's fight for dignity and her dream, and Cade's internal struggle to keep his past, the tendency toward violence, buried. Now, the external threat was fully established, waiting for the inciting incident. The inciting incident arrived not with a gunshot, but with the quiet, final collapse of a tired man. June found her father slumped over the ledgers, the faint, stale scent of sweat and dried dust heavy in the air. He hadn't been well for weeks, weakened by the relentless drought and the worry that had eaten at him like a pestilence. The doctor, who had been an hour late riding from the next settlement, spoke of a heart exhausted by the strain of the territory and the burden of debt. June did not cry then. Crying was a luxury only afforded to those who could pause their lives. She simply covered him with a quilt and walked back to the counter to serve the few remaining travelers. Her grief was a cold, hard stone settling deep in her abdomen, a familiar weight she now had to carry alone. The immediate consequence was financial exposure. The small loans her father had secured for the last expansion, the roof repairs, and the new stove were now due, the promissory notes fluttering dangerously in the meager wind. The day after the burial, Ezra Pike himself rode into town, a grand figure on a black stallion, wearing a silk vest that seemed an obscene offense to the choking poverty of the dust. Pike sat at June's best table, not as a customer, but as a judge. His two men, Rook and Miles, stood by the doorway, their bulk blocking the light. "June, dear girl," Pike began, his voice oily and sympathetic in the way only a predator's can be. "Terrible about your father. A good man, but impractical. You see, he never understood the reality of this land. Water is king, and I own the kingdom." He slid a contract across the table. It wasn't a purchase agreement, it was a mortgage. Pike offered to absorb her current debts, a paltry sum, really, and provide a steady, controlled supply of water from the Coyote well to the diner. In exchange, he would receive the deed to the property as collateral, along with right of first refusal and access easement to the land bordering the stage stop. It was a thinly veiled move to gain control of the vital spot June planned for her lodge. "It's a kindness." "June," Pike insisted, tapping the document. "Sign this and you'll never thirst again. You and that plump little baker's girl body of yours will be safe. Otherwise, that little dream of a lodge will dry up before the ink does." June's internal conflict was immediate and searing her dignity and her father's legacy versus bare survival. The image of the few hateful glances she received from the church ladies, especially the perpetual disapproval of her size and unconventional ambition, fueled her fire. But the raw need to simply live was more persuasive than pride. "7 days, Mr. Pike," June said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Give me 7 days to settle my father's affairs and find an alternative." Pike chuckled, a dry, rattling sound like wind through dead leaves. 7 days, and if you don't sign, June, I will personally see that the ditch that feeds your meager little cistern from the runoff creek is dry as a bone. Rook, Miles, you heard the time limit." When they left, the silence in the diner was louder than any shouting. June felt a moment of raw, shaking vulnerability, a feeling quickly interrupted by the abrupt, noisy arrival of Cade Foster. He didn't enter through the main door, but stormed into the kitchen through the back, his face a mask of furious concentration, completely unlike his usual controlled demeanor. "I need to talk to you. June, now." She led him to the empty pantry, the scent of flour and sadness hanging heavy. "I quit," Cade said, his words clipped. "I wrote out for my pay, and I saw the list. Pike is consolidating, using the drought to choke out every small claim near the future rail spur. He calls the job driving the cattle in, moving the people out. And you were on the list. June, Mallory's diner." June simply stared, the new grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this betrayal, or was it a confession? "And what were you, Cade?" she asked, the question sharp and clean as a surgeon's knife. "The lead cattle driver. The man who was supposed to deliver the pressure. Were you the one who would encourage me to sign?" Cade flinched, the accusation hitting his deeply guarded sense of honor. He revealed the early twist of the plot, the thing that tormented him. He had been hired as a seasonal hand, but the contract had a vague secondary clause, and he had already received a substantial advance payment. "I didn't read the fine print. June," he confessed, his voice low and tight. "I needed the work. The job was supposed to be easy. I was to be the muscle if anyone resisted the legal process. I took the advance. It's a debt of honor now, and Pike expects the work or the money back." Cade's internal conflict was agonizing. His past life as a hired gun, though mostly for protection, was threatening to resurface. The money was a chain, dragging him back to the man who operated on the razor's edge of the law. He had promised himself to stand for the weak, but now he had taken Pike's money, making him complicit. Honor dictated he repay the debt, but repayment meant leaving her unprotected. "June, watching the raw, conflicted honesty on his face, felt her judgment soften. "You have 7 days, too," she concluded, her voice regaining its practical edge, "to decide which man you want to be." Cade left the pantry and rode straight to the Black Pike Ranch foreman's shack. He didn't see Pike, didn't need to. He returned the full sum of the advance. Not in cash, but in the form of his prized sorrel stallion, a magnificent creature Cade had gentled and trained himself. The horse was worth more than the debt, and Cade accepted the unspoken, inevitable consequence. He was now entirely on his own, white-knuckled and broke, having traded his best asset for a clean conscience. He came back to the diner, finding June in the kitchen, furiously chopping vegetables for a stew she couldn't be sure she would have water to cook. "I settled my debt," Cade stated simply. "With my horse, I'm walking away from Pike, but I'm not walking away from this town, or from you. That contract Pike made you look at, it's based on the premise that only Pike's water is legal. We need to find the truth about the water rights." June stopped chopping, the large knife resting heavily on the cutting board. His commitment was a profound relief, but the path ahead was terrifying. The news of June's refusal and Cade's abrupt departure from the Black Pike payroll spread through Dry Creek like a brush fire. Sheriff Doyle, the picture of weary apathy, cornered June as she walked to the post office. "June, listen to me," Doyle pleaded, shifting his weight nervously. "You need to sign. Don't cause trouble for Ezra. He holds the cards, girl. He's the reason we have the protection we do. Just be sensible. Nobody can afford to cross him." His advice was a reflection of the town's silent, fearful consensus. The community, desperate and beaten down by the drought, actively avoided June. They needed Pike's limited, expensive water, and they didn't want to be tainted by her rebellion. The internal turmoil caused by the church women's body shaming and general disapproval intensified. Echoing the broader societal judgment, she was the problem, the too large woman causing ripples in the established order. June felt the chill of isolation, but it only hardened her resolve. She realized that her fight for the diner was a fight for the principle of self-worth, her physical presence, her business, her future, all of it. That night, Rook and Miles made their presence known. They didn't enter the diner. They simply stood across the street, their figures monolithic in the moonlight, watching. The next morning, a dead coyote was found on the diner's porch, a clear, brutal message from the Black Pike Ranch. June, however, acted with the practical courage that defined her. First, she secured her father's papers in a heavy, bolted chest. Then, she walked out back to the nearly dry, silt-choked runoff stream, a public creek that theoretically still fed the entire north side of the town. "Rory," she called, spotting the boy mending a fence post nearby. "Grab your shovel. We're digging a trench." June, her face grim, started digging a small, shallow irrigation ditch from the barely flowing stream bed toward her cistern. It was a symbolic, futile gesture against the drought, but it was legal. It was an act of defiance, a quiet statement that she would not simply wait to be choked. She enlisted help, offering loaves of her precious, still-rising sourdough in exchange for an hour's labor. 2 poverty-stricken homesteaders and her friend, Letty, the seamstress, joined her, bringing buckets and determination. Cade watched the digging for an hour before joining. He brought his own equipment, a heavy spade and a pickaxe. Recognizing that manual labor was the only language Ezra Pike would respect right now. "June, this won't give you enough water to brew a decent cup of coffee," Cade stated, swinging the pickaxe into the hard, packed earth with a grim concentration. "I know," June replied, not stopping her work with the spade. Her breathing was heavy, but regular. "But it tells Pike that I haven't signed the papers. It tells this town that I'm working for the water I need, not begging for his permission. If I lose fighting on my own ground, for my own right to survive." He glanced at her, sweat darkening the shirt across her sturdy back. She was utterly exhausted. yet moving with a furious energy. Her strength wasn't just physical, it was an internal reservoir of self-respect. "Ezra will cut the flow," Cade warned. "He's going to block the creek higher up, past the public access point. He'll make it look natural." June straightened up, wiping the grime from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "Then we need to find the law that proves he can't. We need to find someone who remembers the legal boundaries of the old Coyote Well runoff, and you, Cade Foster, are going to help me." Cade nodded, plunging the pickaxe back into the earth. His face set. He was now officially an enemy of the Black Pike Ranch. He was broke, had lost his best horse, and was putting his life and his hard-won peace at risk for a woman he admired. A cause he believed in, and a principle that spoke to the deepest part of his character. It was an even trade. The conflict had been internalized. Now, it manifested in the open, dusty field. The small alliance had been forged in the heat of shared adversity and mutual respect. June, the practical leader fighting for her dignity. Cade, the disciplined warrior fighting for his soul. Letty, the loyal friend. And Rory, the silent, observant apprentice. The work continued until late into the night, when June finally locked the diner door. Her muscles screamed, but the small ditch, barely more than a scratch in the earth, was complete. Cade stood by the water trough at the livery. It was the only place in Dry Creek where he could see the water level drop in real time. He reached down and touched the wood. It was damp only near the bottom. By midnight, the trough was bone dry. The runoff, subtle and small, had been cut. Ezra Pike had delivered his first chilling consequence. The horse trough was bone dry, the final image of the night, a tangible sign that the fight had truly begun. The dry trough was the stick that broke the camel's back, driving June not to despair, but to action. She marched straight to Ma Hollis's saloon, finding the proprietor wiping down the mahogany bar with an air of practiced gloom. "Ma, you know the territory better than anyone," June said, setting a dime on the counter. "My father always said you knew where the water really went before Pike bought the land." Ma Hollis, a woman whose face was a map of every hard winter and busted dream in Dry Creek, looked around to ensure no eavesdroppers lingered. She slid a dusty, rolled-up sheet of brittle paper from beneath the bar. "This ain't for sale. June, it's a survey map from before the war, when they thought about putting a state park here. See this dotted line, Ma's finger, stained with tobacco juice, traced a faint course. This shows a secondary aquifer running straight from the Cotton Jaw Gorge, feeding a seep on Pike's land, the Coyote Well, but also continuing underground to an old, abandoned settler's claim near the mesa. It's barely a trickle now, but it's there. If we dig, we might tap it." The parchment, faded and cracked, felt like a treasure map in June's hands. It represented not just water, but hope, a path around Pike's stranglehold. The next morning, before the sun had fully lifted the dust pall, Cade, June, and Rory set out. Cade carried a pick, a shovel, and his battered field gear. June carried a small rucksack heavy with canteens and her latest sourdough loaf, wrapped tight in cloth. Rory, feeling immensely important, rode Cade's spare packhorse, leading their meager gear. Their destination was Cotton Jaw Gorge, a winding, bone-dry arroyo 20 miles north, known for its sudden, heat-trapping walls and the occasional rattlesnake. The journey was a crucible. The sun was a physical weight, pressing the breath out of them. They passed the bleaching skeletons of lost cows and occasionally spotted the telltale tracks of a lone wolf, desperate and lean. June, though physically robust, was not a natural rider. She was sitting a new, rigid saddle Cade had acquired cheaply. "Ease your weight, June," Cade instructed, riding alongside her. "Let the horse do the work. You're fighting the rhythm." June grimaced, shifting her ample body awkwardly. "It's easy for you, sitting all neat and trim. This saddle is a punishment for my profile." Cade slowed his horse, his face shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. I replaced the saddle horn this morning. The old one was cracked, but you're right, you're too stiff. He dismounted without a word, pulling her to a halt. Dismount. I want you riding bareback for 5 miles. No saddle, no stirrups. Just the blanket. Feel the horse's muscles, not the leather. June looked skeptical, her cheeks flushing, but she complied, perched on the blanket, her thighs gripping the horse's broad back. She was acutely aware of her body, exposed and unshielded. If I fall off, who catches me? June teased, trying to mask her nerves with humor. Cade looked at her, his usual restrained expression cracking into a brief, powerful smile. Me. With all of me. But you won't fall. You're stronger than you think. June. He walked beside her horse for the next hour, his presence steady and grounding. She learned to adjust her weight, sensing the horse's needs, finding a new kind of confidence in her own strength. This simple lesson was a metaphor for their relationship. Cade was making her feel safe enough to discover her own capabilities, not depending on his to survive. When they reached the designated mesa site after 3 days of travel, they found little more than hard clay and sun-baked rock. Cade consulted Ma Hollis's map. The old settlers used a shallow pump here, Cade explained, pointing to a depression. The aquifer is miles down, but the pressure might bring a trickle up if we can stabilize the earth and pump the air out. We need a drill and a windmill post. They spent the next day wrestling a tall, salvaged wooden post into the ground, stabilizing it with stones and sweat. Rory proved invaluable, scrambling up the structure like a monkey to attach the vanes Cade had jury-rigged from old fence slats. It took another day of back-breaking labor to drive a thin, improvised drill rod deep enough to find damp earth. When they finally attached a heavy bucket pump and the small windmill vanes caught the afternoon breeze, the rhythmic squeak, squeak, squeak was the sweetest sound June had ever heard. The first bucket of water was muddy and thick with silt. They built a simple filter system using clean cloths and charcoal from their fire. By sunset, they had a steady, if slow, supply of cool, clear water. The windmill, turning slowly but persistently against the orange sky, became the first symbol of their shared resilience. The turning vane, slow but durable, equals steadfast spirit. They didn't keep the water to themselves. Riding back to Dry Creek, they distributed the limited clean water, offering it freely to the poorest families and those whose livestock were suffering. June also set up a small table outside the diner and offered her fresh-baked buns and bread, now moist and perfectly risen, thanks to the new water to any thirsty soul. Eat and drink, she told them, offering a small, shared comfort. We don't have much, but we have enough for a start. The shared bread, freely given, began to form a nascent sense of community, a quiet counter-narrative to Pike's tyranny. This small victory did not go unnoticed. On the third morning back, Cade was working on the windmill post just outside the town limits when Rook and Miles arrived, riding hard. They dismounted, their faces set in aggressive sneers. Pike says you're trespassing on his heir. Foster, Rook drawled, kicking at the base of the wooden post. And the woman is encouraging lawlessness with her charity. The post is on public land. Rook, Cade said, his voice calm, never raising the pitch. He stood up straight, his hands empty. He would not draw his gun. He could not. That past life had to stay buried. This here thing is going down, Miles announced, drawing a heavy axe from his saddle sheath. Cade stepped forward. No, it's not. The fight was brutal, fueled by the heat and desperation. Cade, though smaller than the hulking Rook, fought with an economical, disciplined strength. He used his knowledge of movement, dodging the big man's clumsy swings and leveraging his weight against him. He knew every blow he landed was a blow against the man he was afraid of becoming again. He took punches, but he kept his hands away from his holstered pistol. Rook hit him hard in the ribs, a blow that took his breath away. Cade responded by sweeping Rook's legs out and sending him sprawling into the dust. Miles, seeing his partner down, raised the axe not to chop the wood, but to threaten Cade. "This ain't over." "Foster," Miles snarled, dropping the axe and pulling a short whip. "Pike's got his eyes on you. You run with the Baker girl. You run off the wrong cliff." Cade, breathing hard, his face bruised, simply stared them down, making them break contact first. Rook and Miles remounted and rode away, but the threat had been delivered a clear, physical warning. Cade had won the skirmish without drawing iron, a victory for his personal code, but he had been severely cautioned. Later that day, June was delivering a small loaf to Letty's dress shop. As she passed the church social hall, she overheard a cluster of the community's wealthiest women, the church ladies, talking, their voices dripping with affected piety. "Look at her, one woman, Mrs. Davies, hissed. That Mallory girl, parading around with that ruffian cowboy, giving away bread like a common pauper. If she would just control her appetites, maybe she could control her size. No decent man will ever choose such an ample woman." Another agreed. "It's the lack of grace. She's too much of everything, too loud, too big, too ambitious. A woman should be demure and thin, not a barrel." June felt the familiar, cold sting of judgment, the social attack on her inherent self-worth. Inside the dress shop, June recounted the exchange to Letty, who was working on a vibrant, closely tailored dress. "They hate you because you don't disappear." "June," Letty said, snapping a thread, "they are thin, quiet shadows who live on Pike's charity. You are a mountain who bakes bread, and that scares them." Letty held up a dress, a rich blue fabric cut to fit June's exact, abundant measurements, hugging her curves rather than hiding them. "I finished the new traveling dress for you," Letty said. "They want you to wear sackcloth. You wear this. Show them that strength is grace. Your body is yours, June, and you define its beauty." June changed into the dress, looking at her reflection in the dusty mirror. It wasn't about being thin. It was about honoring her body, her engine of perseverance. As it was, this was a moment of profound personal revolution, a quiet, internal pledge of body respect. The windmill post, slowly turning, and the shared bread were now clear. Defiant symbols of rising hope. Their short-term goal to dig to the secondary, seep and gather proof of Pike's illegal diversion of the public creek was on track. That night, Cade sat with June outside the livery, patching his bruised ribs. The moon was a fat, yellow coin in the deep black sky. Rory was asleep inside the hayloft. June gently applied a cold compress. "Rook hit you hard. You should have drawn your gun. Cade, you had every right." Cade flinched, not from the pain, but from the word. "The minute I draw iron, June, I'm back in Abilene. I'm back in that life. I made a promise to myself. I won't pull a weapon on a man unless he's threatening a life. I need to trust the law, even a crooked law, more than the pull of the trigger." He spoke sparingly of his past in Kansas, but tonight the memory was a fresh wound. "I used to ride with a crew. Protection. We got into a bad spot. I drew fast, maybe too fast. A young man, a boy really, got caught in the crossfire. He was hit, not by me, but I was part of the problem. That night, I threw the rifle in the river and promised myself restraint first. Always." His confession was quiet, vulnerable. June knew she wasn't just dealing with a handsome cowboy. She was dealing with a man wrestling with a deep, moral scar, choosing daily to be better than his past. "Thank you for telling me," June whispered, not offering judgment, only acceptance. The moon illuminated the dust, and the slow, consistent squeak of the distant windmill was the only sound, the steadfast sound of perseverance that would lead them into the next day's fight. Ma Hollis was the key. She possessed not just the map to the secondary aquifer, but the legal wisdom of the land. The morning after Cade's standoff, June sat with Ma Hollis in the back room of the saloon. a sanctuary smelling of stale beer and quiet secrets. Ma Hollis produced a small, rolled parchment tied with twine, much newer than the survey map. "This here is the Wyoming Territorial Water Act of 1884, Ma whispered, her voice gravelly. "Specifically, this section on riparian rights for public creeks. See this line? It states that any established, visible creek, even one reduced by drought, cannot be fully blocked or diverted for private gain if that diversion impacts established settlement rights, like your father's old cistern." The document was dense, but the meaning was clear. The runoff creek, though tiny, was public. And Ezra Pike's men, by cutting the flow, were violating territorial law. The Coyote Well itself was private, but the feeder creek was not. This was their legal tool, small but sharp. June realized what they needed was irrefutable evidence of the blockage, not just testimony. Cade had returned to the livery, frustrated by the need for patience. His body was stiff, a constant, dull ache reminding him of his restraint. He felt the old, dark energy, the urge to meet force with superior force prickling his skin. He fought it by meticulously cleaning and oiling his saddle leather, a ritualistic act of self-control. The saddle rope, sometimes taut and sometimes slack, symbolizes self-control. Rory, the observant boy, wandered into the livery, his eyes wide. "Mr. Cade, I saw them. Rook and Miles. They rode out before dawn with 3 other men and some shovels, way past the old cottonwood grove, where the creek bends into Pike's land." Cade and June immediately understood. Pike was fortifying the illegal dam. They hatched a plan. Rory, small and quick, was the perfect spy. That afternoon, June gave Rory a basket supposedly filled with dried apples for his neighbor's farm. His real cargo, a keen sense of observation and a warning to stay hidden. Rory returned 2 hours later, breathless and excited. They did it. They dug a big, wide-earth dam and piled up rocks. But I saw something else. Mr. Cade, they laid down a big zinc pipe under the rocks and covered it with mud. It runs right from the creek bed, under the dam, and straight toward the Black Pike land. It's stealing the water underground. This was the golden evidence. A pipe, a deliberate, concealed conduit, was not a natural blockage. It was clear, engineered theft. June, energized by the truth, needed to solidify their public position before Pike retaliated further. She put on the blue dress Letty had made, the one that celebrated her shape, and marched, with Cade and Rory close behind, to Ma Hollis's saloon, timing her arrival for the busiest moment. She laid out a tray of fresh, perfect pecan rolls, their scent filling the smoky air. As June set the rolls down, a group of Pike's ranch hands, drunk and loud, started to jeer. "Well, look who waltzed in." One man, named Silas, yelled, tipping his hat, the big lady and her little bodyguard. "Here till you lost your nerve. Foster and Miss Mallory. Maybe if you did less baking, you'd find a man who can buy you a proper slice of land." The laughter was coarse and cruel, aimed directly at June's body and her struggle. June felt the insult, sharp and familiar, but before she could reply, Cade stepped forward, his frame blocking the view of June from the men. The temperature in the room plummeted. "That's enough, Silas." Cade's voice was low, laced with the kind of danger that didn't need volume to be understood. "You've had your fun. Back away." Cade's face was stone. His internal conflict was a raging fire, the deep. Learned lesson to choose law over violence warred with the primal urge to defend the woman standing behind him. "Avoid raising my hand too much like in the past. Self-restraint is key to maturity." June placed a hand on Cade's back. A silent, firm request. "My fight, my words." Cade felt her touch and understood. He took a small step back, his shoulders still tense, allowing June the space to speak, ensuring her safety without stealing her voice. This was his newly defined role, a protector who enabled, not a tyrant who dominated. "June, feeling the courage flow back, faced the men, a slow, wry smile spreading across her face. She picked up a pecan roll. "Silas, if you want one of these rolls, you pay for it and you keep your dirty mouth closed," June said, her voice clear. "And as for finding a man, I'm looking for a man who cares about the integrity of his spine, not the size of my waist. Frankly, Silas, you're lacking in both departments." The saloon erupted in nervous laughter. June had turned the tables, using her wit and self-possession as a weapon. Silas, red-faced, didn't know how to respond to logic seasoned with scorn. Ma Hollis, leaning over the bar, chortled, adding a layer of black humor to the confrontation. "Silas, the only thing bigger than June's heart is her account book. Now buy a drink or get out." The incident spread quickly. The town had seen June not retreat in shame, but stand tall and fight with words. She was defining her own value, independent of their shallow, cruel judgments. The dress Letty made embracing June's body is the symbol of accepting herself as she is. The consequence of this public defiance was swift. Within the hour, a ranch hand delivered a terse note from Ezra Pike to the diner. "If you insist on playing the righteous fool, expect a fitting lesson in the power of nature." Cade, looking at the sky, didn't like the sound of that. Dark, ominous clouds were rolling in from the western mesa. Not rain clouds, but the heavy, bruised color of a major dust storm. Dry creek storms were violent, blinding, and often lethal. They were Pike's perfect partner in crime. "He's not going to attack us." "June," Cade said, looking out at the sky. "He's going to wait for the storm to do his dirty work. He'll make sure all the small access routes we built are buried and destroyed, and our town well cover is blown off." Cade immediately began securing the diner. He hammered planks over the big front windows, reinforcing the latch on the back door. He moved June's precious sourdough starter into the cellar, the heart of their hope, protected beneath the earth. June, meanwhile, didn't stop baking. She worked through the coming gloom, packing dozens of her hearty, dark brown sugar buns food that would last and provide quick energy, wrapping them in oilcloth. Brown sugar buns for the unpredictable tomorrow. "Why the extra baking?" Cade asked, sweating as he drilled the final plank into place. "Because Ezra Pike thinks the dust storm is only his weapon," June replied. "Securing the last roll with twine, but the storm is just a circumstance. Cade, and when people are afraid and hungry, they remember who offered them shelter and who offered them threats." Cade paused, leaning on his hammer, looking at her with deep respect. He saw the pure, strategic clarity in her compassion. She wasn't just fighting for her land. She was mobilizing a community through kindness and shared need. He walked over and checked the lock he had just reinforced. "It's solid. Nothing short of dynamite will blow it in." June offered him one of the sugar buns. He took a bite, the flavor rich and comforting against the rising panic in the air. The first gusts of the high wind hit Dry Creek, tearing at the loose shutters and rattling the reinforced door of the diner. The sky outside turned a sickly, deep orange, then plunged into a swirling red gloom. The storm was upon them, and the conflict was about to reach a fever pitch. The sandstorm hit Dry Creek not with a roar, but with a grinding, heavy force, like the world itself was being scraped raw. It was the natural attack Ezra Pike had anticipated, and it struck Mallory's diner with immediate violence. The reinforced planks on the windows groaned, but held. The glass on the small upper transom, however, shattered inward with a sharp crack, showering June and Cade with fine, gritty dust. The air immediately turned opaque, visibility dropping to mere inches, smelling of ozone and pulverized earth. "The windmill!" June shouted over the deafening shriek of the wind. Gone, Cade yelled back. "Couldn't have survived that blast. Rory, get down, crawl!" Rory, huddled near the counter, was already on his stomach. Cade quickly soaked the 2 remaining hand towels from the kitchen sink, the only water they had to spare, and secured them tightly over June and Rory's noses and mouths. "Don't talk. Don't open your eyes," Cade commanded, his voice tight. He forced June and Rory to crawl low, pressed against the sturdy interior wall. The wind was a physical beast, trying to suck them out through the broken transom. "We have to get to the lumber shed." Cade gestured toward the small, sturdy outbuilding used to store their extra wood and canvas. Better structure, less glass. The transit was terrifying. Cade led them, crawling, bracing his body against the gale. The dry sand whipped at their exposed skin, stinging like 1,000 tiny needles. June could feel the incredible physical strength needed just to maintain traction, and she was grateful for the solid anchor of her own body, which allowed her to press low and hold on. They had crawled barely 30 yards when they heard a thin, panicked scream from the neighboring lot, the small, dilapidated cabin belonging to the widow, Jensen. Cade stopped, his masked face turning toward the sound. "It's little Abigail. She's outside." "No, Cade, you'll be blown away," June pleaded, gripping his arm tightly. Cade shook his head. "Already moving. Stay put. Keep Rory covered." His principles were absolute, immediate. He disappeared into the swirling red darkness, a ghost dissolving into the storm. June dragged Rory behind the meager shelter of a stack of dry barrels, pulling her share of the sugar buns from her apron pocket and forcing them into the boy's hand. Rory, terrified, chewed obediently. Moments later, Cade reappeared, staggering, half carrying the small, coughing child. He pushed Abigail into June's waiting arms, directing them both toward the narrow, low door of the lumber shed. Once inside the shed, they were wrapped in blessed, relative quiet. Cade slammed the heavy door shut, barring it with a salvaged piece of timber. The only light came from the small, oil-burning lantern Cade had carried, casting a faint, buttery glow against the swirling motes of dust filtering through the cracks. The storm lantern is the symbol of human light in the darkness. June settled Abigail, sharing the last of her canteen water and whispering reassurances. The little girl soon drifted into an exhausted sleep. The storm raged outside for what felt like an eternity, the sound a continuous, violent freight train. June sat near Cade, the air thick and hot. She reached out and felt the bruised bump on his shoulder from the earlier fight with Rook. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from the dust, the damp towel still clinging to her face. "You risked everything for that child." Cade leaned back against the wall, utterly spent. He breathed deeply, letting the silence of the lumber shed absorb the external chaos. "It's nothing," he rasped. "It's what you do. But June, I want you to know something. When I was out there, fighting that wind, I was thinking about the churchwomen, about the mean things they say." June tensed, pulling her strong shoulders in slightly. She felt raw and exposed, her large body filling the small space of the shed. The judgment of the town, always present, felt especially acute now that her survival depended on her physical hardiness. She took a shaky breath, letting the shame and the exhaustion speak for her. "They say I should lose weight before love," she said, the words barely a breath. "That I'm too large for happiness, that my ambition is too big for my form." Cade turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light of the lantern. His gaze was steady, piercing through the superficial layers of her self-doubt. It was a look of pure, unadulterated reverence and respect. He didn't pity her, and he certainly didn't lie. A faint, gentle smile touched his lips, a look of profound, unconditional acceptance. "Honey, you'd lose me first." The 7 words landed with the weight of a solemn vow. It wasn't a comment on her beauty in the traditional sense, but an affirmation that her strength, her substance, her essential moreness, was precisely the thing that kept him anchored. To change her, to diminish her, would be to lose the woman he had come to rely on, the woman who was currently saving a child and feeding a town. June felt a sudden, sharp welling of emotion in her chest. She pressed her forehead gently against his, not in a romantic kiss, but a simple, profound touch of shared survival and deep connection. In the flickering light, her eyes welled up. It was the first time she truly believed she was enough, completely and absolutely. The storm broke 2 hours before dawn. When they finally emerged from the shed, Dry Creek was a scene of utter, red devastation. Sand dunes were piled high against the buildings, and the air was thick with the lingering scent of pulverized earth. Their small windmill was nothing but splinters, buried beneath a 10-foot drift. But the storm had provided a crucial gift. They immediately walked to the location of Pike's illegal earth dam on the creek bed. The immense wind and rain runoff, surprisingly heavy for a brief period during the height of the storm, had done what their shovels could not. The fragile, illegally constructed dam had been breached. The side of the bank had collapsed, and there, clearly exposed for the world to see, was the thick gray zinc pipe Rory's gold evidence embedded in the creek bed, leading directly toward the Black Pike property line. It was an unmistakable, engineered diversion of public water. Cade whistled low. Ezra Pike made a colossal mistake. He tried to hide his theft, and the land itself ripped the secret open. June looked at the pipe, its surface slick with mud and condensation. "We have to take it. We have to take the pipe, the mud, and the evidence now before Pike's men can rebury it." The social conflict, however, was also laid bare by the disaster. While June, Cade, and Rory worked to help the widow Jensen and others dig out their homes, Ezra Pike's men, operating with cold efficiency, were already moving through the town. Ezra Pike arrived on horseback, looking impossibly clean, offering emergency loans and relief supplies, but only in exchange for signatures on preliminary land sale agreements. He was capitalizing on the chaos, leveraging the community's desperation to consolidate his holdings under the guise of rescue. "Sign here, folks," Pike called out, his voice smooth and authoritative. "And the Black Pike Ranch will guarantee you water and lumber for immediate repairs. It's the only way to survive the season." The storm lantern, though now extinguished in the dawn, symbolized the quiet, human light June and Cade offered a stark contrast to the darkness of Ezra Pike's opportunistic greed. June, catching Pike's eye from across the dusty street, gave him a look of hard, resolute hatred. She knew exactly what she had to do. Cade, using a pair of heavy pliers and a small saw, began the difficult process of cutting a section of the zinc pipe, making sure to capture the muddy, wet earth surrounding it. "This piece of pipe," Cade grunted, straining against the metal, "is the only thing that stands between you and Pike owning this whole territory." Rory, still shaken but focused, suddenly grabbed Cade's arm. "Mr. Cade, stop! I heard Rook talking outside the saloon just now. He said they are going to ride out soon and meet you on the road and make sure that length of pipe never makes it to the judge." The stage was set for the next confrontation. Cade had the evidence, but delivering it meant risking the violence he desperately sought to avoid. He and June had survived the natural battle only to face a moral ambush. The moment Ezra Pike realized the storm had exposed his zinc pipe, the nature of his attack changed from economic coercion to outright smear and ambush. He couldn't risk the exposed pipe reaching the circuit judge. The very next morning, before June and Cade could finalize their plans to leave for the district office, the rumors began. Pike's cronies, leveraging the town's fear and the ever-present disapproval of June, scattered poisonous whispers. "Cade Foster. He's not just a seasonal hand," one man muttered outside the post office, loud enough for the sheriff to hear. "He was a hired gun in Abilene, fast with a pistol. He rode with the railroad contractors, dealing out lead. Not justice. He's nothing but Ezra Pike's cast-off enforcer, and now he's turning on his boss because the Baker girl has caught his eye." The poison worked. June heard the whispers. As she packed the heavy section of pipe, now wrapped securely in canvas, she felt a cold uncertainty settle over her. She had seen the controlled rage in Cade's eyes during the fight with Rook, the deep discipline he imposed on his own violence. But she also knew his past was a shadow he never fully escaped. Could she trust the man she admired? Or was he merely a dangerous instrument? prone to breaking the law he now claimed to uphold. She walked to the livery, finding Cade meticulously checking the loads in his revolver, a necessary precaution for the ride ahead, but one that only deepened her unease. "Abilene," June started, her voice level, avoiding accusation. "They're saying you were a hired gun, a mercenary." Cade stopped his work, the click of the cylinder final and loud in the quiet barn. He knew this moment was inevitable. He had demanded honesty from her. She deserved the same from him. "I was," Cade admitted, looking directly at her, his eyes clear but guarded. "Not Pike's man, but I took money for carrying a gun. Riding protection for a few years after I left Kansas. It felt like honest work at the time. I was paid to prevent trouble, not start it. But the truth is, the line between protection and intimidation is thin as paper out here." He walked over and sat on a bale of hay, running a hand over his face. The heat of the territory seemed to carry the weight of his memory. "I was with a wagon train. South of here, there was a confrontation. I drew my weapon. It ended in gunfire. Not a duel, just chaos. A young man, he was barely 18, was caught in the exchange. He was injured badly. He lived, but he carried the scars. I saw what I had become, a man who solved problems with a quick draw, who escalated instead of diffusing. I realized I was just another man with a gun looking for a reason to use it." He looked up at June, the honesty in his gaze a profound admission of vulnerability. "That's why I won't draw first. June, that's why I took Rook's beating and didn't fire a shot. I'm scared that if I go back to that, I'll lose myself entirely. I'm done being a problem. I want to be the solution. But yes, the rumors are true. I was paid to shoot, and I have blood on my hands, though I try to keep it clean now." June let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hesitation, that half-beat of doubt, vanished. Trust, she realized, wasn't about finding a man without flaws. It was about accepting a man with his flaws. Knowing his promise to be better was genuine and hard-won. Cade hadn't confessed to secure her favor. He had confessed to protect his integrity. "We ride in an hour," June affirmed, her mind made up. "We need to present this evidence to the district judge when the hydraulic assessment team passes through the territory. We'll meet them at the turn in Wolf Canyon." Wolf Canyon was a desolate, winding pass, the perfect location for an ambush, precisely why Pike would choose it. They set out with the heavy zinc pipe section secured in a locked wooden chest, June's old hope chest, repurposed for justice. Cade rode his borrowed mount, leading Rory, who was pale but resolute. June, wearing her tailored blue dress beneath her riding coat, carried the territorial water law document and a rucksack. As they entered the narrow, shadowed canyon, Cade's instinct screamed danger. "Stay close to the canyon wall. June," he warned, his hand hovering over his holster. "Ride single file. Rory, keep your head down." They had ridden barely a mile when they heard the shots, 3 rounds fired high, whistling off the rock face. Rook and Miles were positioned on the ridge, blocking the pass. "Well, well, well," Rook's voice echoed down the canyon. "Looks like the good mister. Foster's going back to his old tricks. Drop the chest. Foster, it's Pike's property now." Miles, meanwhile, quickly rode into the canyon floor behind them and began scattering heavy, square-headed nails on the dry track. A crude but effective way to hobble their horses. Cade pulled his horse to a halt. "We're not fighting you. Rook, we're presenting legal evidence." "You're presenting a target," Miles laughed, drawing a rifle. Cade's heart pounded against his ribs, every nerve screaming at him to draw and end the confrontation quickly. But he remembered his promise, his personal growth. Avoid unnecessary violence. Choose restraint. "June!" the rucksack Cade yelled. June immediately understood. She pulled out a small, tightly tied canvas bag from her pack. It contained a mixture of dried pepper, chili powder, and finely ground mustard seed, originally intended as seasoning for her kitchen. It was their alternative to violence, pepper smoke instead of lead. Cade drew his pistol, but only to fire a single, loud warning shot into the air. distracting the men. As the echoes rang out, June hurled the canvas bag with surprising force toward a small campfire Rook's group had been using higher up the ridge. The bag burst upon landing, and the heat from the residual embers immediately ignited the fine powder. A blinding, acrid cloud of smoke, heavy with pepper and chili, billowed upward, catching the wind and swirling directly into the faces of the men on the ridge. Rook and Miles erupted in furious coughs and shouts, their eyes stinging instantly. "Now!" June Ride Cade yelled, kicking his horse forward. They spurred their horses off the trail, scrambling over the rocky embankment, bypassing the scattered nails. The escape was successful, but costly. As they plunged down the rocky incline, Rory's horse stumbled over a hidden rock. Rory was thrown, landing hard on his side, his arm scraping against the sharp schist rock. They stopped a mile past the canyon. Rory was pale, his forearm bleeding freely, the skin scraped raw and deep. June took charge instantly, demonstrating her quiet, competent leadership. She tore strips from her own petticoat, sterilized the wound with their last drops of the well water, and wrapped it tightly and expertly. Rory's whimpers quieted under her firm, gentle touch. Bandaging his arm symbolizes the slow process of healing and restoring hope. They rode the rest of the way to the meeting point, shaken but resolute. Back in Dry Creek, the church ladies seized on the news of the ambush. "That woman is a menace, Mrs." Davies shrieked to a cluster of people outside the general store. "She's running with a known gunman, bringing the lawlessness of Abilene right to our door. She is encouraging vice. Her ambition is too large. Her body is too large. And she is tempting that cowboy toward ruin." But this time, the town didn't immediately cave to the narrative. Letty, standing nearby, spoke up, her voice ringing with clear, cold logic. "June Mallory is fighting to keep the town's water free," Letty stated, pointing to the dust and destruction from the storm. "Ezra Pike brought the storm, but June brought the bread. And that cowboy, who they say is so violent he didn't draw his gun, but he used his wits, saving a child in the process. You are blaming the baker for the drought, and it's pathetic." Ma Hollis, leaning out of the saloon door, added her dry wit. "If the good Lord wanted all women to be thin and quiet, dear Mrs. Davies, he wouldn't have made rye flour. He'd have just made dust. June is made of good rye, and she's got the proof of Pike's theft right now. Stop talking about her size and start asking why Pike is hiding a pipe under public land." The social judgment had been rebuffed. The faith in June's character held steady by those who knew her actions. The core theme was cemented. True trust isn't blind belief. It is knowing the whole truth, the scars, the past, the potential for failure, and still choosing to remain loyal. They reached the designated turn on the trail, waiting for the district judge's party. The air was tense and still before the judge arrived. Cade pulled June aside, his face etched with worry. He reached into his coat and handed her a small, heavy leather pouch. "This is everything I have left. June, my savings from 2 years of work. If they stop us, or if I fall, you use this money. Hire the best legal counsel in the territory. You take that pipe and you sue Pike until he chokes on his own greed." June accepted the pouch, the weight of his sacrifice profound in her hands. "You're not falling, Cade," she promised, her eyes burning with determination. "Maybe not," he conceded, offering a weary half-smile. "But if I do, I need to know you won't give up. The fight is bigger than just the water now. It's about standing our ground." The sound of distant hooves signaled the arrival of the judge. The confrontation with the law was about to begin, but the climax of violence was waiting to strike closer to home. The meeting with the district judge was a necessary formality. June presented the territorial water law document, and Rory provided his detailed testimony. But the judge, bound by procedure, required a full, open hearing and the physical evidence in Dry Creek. He promised to hold a makeshift court session in town in 3 days. timing it with the hydraulic assessment team's scheduled visit. With the countdown begun, the focus shifted entirely to preparation. June. Cade and Rory returned to the charred ruin of the creek bed to carefully gather the evidence. They meticulously collected the section of zinc pipe, still muddy and damning, took samples of the wet soil that had covered it, and, using a surveyor's chain, accurately measured the distance from the pipe's origin to Pike's property line. All of it, the pipe, the soil samples, Ma Hollis's old map, and the new measurements were sealed within June's sturdy wooden hope chest. June brought the chest back to the diner, placing it, with heavy symbolic intent, beneath the large table where she kneaded her dough every morning. The chest of evidence rests beneath the sourdough table justice hidden within daily life. The next phase was critical public opinion. June knew she was fighting not just a legal battle, but a social one. Ezra Pike's power lay in the town's silent, fearful compliance. June resumed baking, using the precious water rationed from the little windmill. She didn't sell the bread, she gave it away. She walked the dusty streets, delivering warm loaves to the struggling homesteaders and the poor cattle hands Pike had dismissed. "I only ask for one thing in return," June would say, her eyes earnest. "A signature. Not on a deed, but on a petition. A statement that you believe the creek should be free for all, under the law." The hard-pressed farmers, having seen June and Cade risk ambush and injury for the community, began to trust. The small, free act of kindness, the gift of food, broke through the wall of fear. The poor cowhands, long bullied by Pike's foreman, started to speak up, whispering confirmations of the diversion pipe. The community movement was taking fragile, hopeful root. Cade, meanwhile, devoted himself to a new, specific task. Pike's men would undoubtedly try to impede the judge's entry into the territory. Cade needed a reliable scout horse, one quick and smart enough to navigate any blockade. He found it in the livery stable, a young, half-wild Mustang known as Ash, which no one had been able to gentle. For 2 days, Cade worked with the horse, his approach a masterclass in patient, nonviolent discipline. June watched him through the dusty kitchen window, the sight of Cade's sleeves rolled up, his lean, powerful forearms glistening with sweat, the slow, rhythmic movements, and the brief, triumphant smile when the horse finally submitted to the halter. June felt a deep, warm stirring in her chest, a feeling of powerful, quiet admiration. She was moved not by his speed with a gun, but by his steadfast, gentle mastery over an animal. She held herself back, maintaining her distance, but the bond deepened with every shared sight of struggle and persistence. The night before the itinerant court session, the tension in the diner was palpable. Cade and June sat at the counter, the small, heavy evidence chest at June's feet. They were rehearsing her testimony, a detailed, concise account of Pike's actions and the evidence they had recovered. "When the judge asks you about the financial incentive, June, what do you say?" Cade prompted, his voice low. "I say that Pike offered to clear my debt in exchange for the deed, and water access was the lure." June recited firmly. "And why did you refuse?" June smiled, her practical, witty spirit cutting through the nervousness. "Because if I lost the diner, I would have nothing left to sell. And if I lost my honor, I would have nothing left to buy. And I would rather thirst than sign away my right to fight." Cade nodded, allowing himself a genuine, proud laugh. "Good. Now, what if you freeze up?" "If I freeze up," June replied, lightly touching her tongue, "I'll bite my tongue." "Don't," Cade said, pushing a dark sugar bun toward her. "Bite a bun instead. Keep the wit sharp and the blood flowing." The rhythmic practice was a counterpoint to the growing threat outside. Ezra Pike was not a man to wait for legal defeat. Miles and Rook, under Pike's direct orders, rode into Dry Creek that same evening. Their first stop was the sheriff's office. Ezra had offered Sheriff Doyle a substantial sum and the promise of land security enough to sway a man already weakened by cowardice. Doyle, pale and sweaty, agreed to lose the territorial water law document, and, more critically, agreed to turn a blind eye to any accidents that might occur before dawn. Their final act was planned for the dark hours. They circled the Mallory diner, carrying torches and a can of coal oil, determined to burn the structure to the ground and destroy the evidence within. The internal conflict June carried, the massive, terrifying risk she had taken, returned with full force that night. She watched Cade sleeping fitfully on a cot in the back room, the leather pouch of his savings still heavy in her keeping. She fears losing everything if she fails, but realizes that losing her integrity would be the true, final failure. If I lose the court case, I lose the land, but I still won't sell my soul. The thought was a steadying mantra. Cade, walking past June's counter just before settling in, noticed the slightly frayed strap on her baker's apron. Without a word, he took a piece of leather thong from his pocket and, with practiced hands, quietly reinforced the strap, looping and knotting it tight. It was a fleeting, tender moment of quiet care, a small, practical act that spoke volumes about his protective devotion. They settled in, but not for long. June woke to a sharp, acrid smell that cut through the dust-heavy air smoke. She heard a faint, strange thump at the back of the building, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. She scrambled up, shaking Cade awake. Fire, the back of the shop. The small, dark stain on the rear wall was rapidly spreading. The coal oil taking hold, the fire, Ezra Pike's final, desperate conspiracy, was already devouring the exterior wall. Mallory's diner was on fire, mere hours before the justice of the peace was due to arrive for the hearing. The flames rose with terrifying speed. Licking at the dry wooden walls of Mallory's diner, Cade erupted from the back room, pulling on his boots and grabbing his revolver and belt in one fluid motion. "Rory is still in the loft," June screamed, already grabbing the heavy wooden chest containing the evidence, the pipe, the map, the soil. The chest of evidence rests beneath the sourdough table justice hidden within daily life. "Get that to Ma Hollis, go," Cade ordered, his face grim, and he plunged into the smoke-filled interior. June, coughing violently, dragged the heavy chest out the front door just as the first tongues of fire wrapped around the window frames. Ma Hollis, who had been alerted by the commotion, was already running from the saloon, throwing open the town bell tower and ringing the alarm with desperate fury. The community, waking to the terrifying sight of the diner ablaze, began to rally. June, Letty, and Ma Hollis formed the core of a bucket line, passing meager pails of water from the remaining town, while each drop a painful, necessary sacrifice. Cade emerged from the billowing black smoke, coughing, carrying a small, terrified Rory draped over his shoulder. He deposited Rory safely with Letty and turned back to the inferno, grabbing an axe to create a firebreak, but his action was interrupted by a new, more dangerous confrontation. Rook and Miles, having completed their arson, were attempting to escape down the alleyway behind the diner. They saw June and the heavy chest she was guarding. They realized the evidence had survived. "Stop them!" Miles shouted, drawing his pistol. Cade saw them blocking June's path, saw the murderous intent in Miles's eyes as the man leveled his weapon. This was the moment. The line had been crossed. Rook rushed Cade, tackling him hard, a brutal, desperate attempt to disarm him. Cade, still holding the axe, used the handle to trip Rook, sending the big man tumbling. Miles, seeing his partner fall, raised his pistol and pointed it directly at June, who was shielding Rory and the evidence chest. The threat was clear, immediate, and mortal. June's life was in jeopardy. Cade's lifetime of hard-won restraint shattered, replaced by the instinct of a protector. He drew his revolver in a blur, but he did not shoot Miles. He couldn't. He saw the face of the young man in Abilene flash in his memory. Miles fired a shot at June. Cade lunged, throwing himself forward, covering June's body just as the bullet struck him in the left shoulder with a sickening, heavy impact. The pain was immediate and blinding, But the physical shield was successful. Only then, with his own body absorbing the damage and June's life still threatened, did Cade aim his weapon. He didn't aim to kill, but to neutralize the threat. His shot was precise and terrifyingly fast, striking Miles's shooting arm and sending the man's pistol spinning into the dust. Miles collapsed, clutching his shattered wrist, neutralized and out of the fight. Rook, seeing Cade bleeding but still standing, stumbled back in stunned fear. The gunshots, louder than the fire, brought Sheriff Doyle running into the alley, his face a mask of panic. "Foster, stop, I'm taking you in," Doyle yelled, drawing his own pistol, his allegiance to Pike momentarily taking precedence over the clear evidence of self-defense. But the town, already exhausted and galvanized by the fire and the threat to June, intervened. The common folk, the poor homesteaders, Ma Hollis, Letty, and the cowhands who had signed June's petition pushed forward, forming a ragged line. He saved the girl. They tried to burn the evidence. Ezra Pike paid them. "Release him," the crowd demanded, their unified voice carrying the weight of public truth. The dynamics of power shifted instantly. Sheriff Doyle, always a man of convenience, not courage, saw the overwhelming human wall demanding justice. He lowered his weapon, defeated not by Cade's speed, but by the community's collective will. Despite the chaos, the district judge arrived shortly after dawn, summoned by a panicked courier. Seeing the fire, the injured men, and the raw fury of the town, he realized the matter could not wait. He ordered an impromptu court session held outdoors in the dust-choked town square. Cade, his shoulder wound bleeding heavily, refused to be moved. June, pale but resolute, staunched his wound with the sleeve of his own shirt before taking her place before the judge. The open-air hearing was stark and quick. June, standing amidst the smell of smoke and the cooling ash, spoke with powerful clarity, presenting the zinc pipe, the muddy soil samples, Ma Hollis's old map, and the section of territorial law. Ma Hollis corroborated the historical water rights, and Rory, his scraped arm bandaged by June, tearfully confirmed seeing Rook and Miles laying the pipe and setting the fire. Ezra Pike, confident in his bribery of Sheriff Doyle, stepped forward to dismiss the accusations as the work of a disgruntled ex-employee and a desperate woman. But the judge, a seasoned man of the territory, produced a folded piece of paper, the final, devastating piece of evidence. It was the letter Pike had sent to Sheriff Doyle offering the bribe and ordering him to suppress the evidence and ignore the necessary accidents. Pike stammered, attempting to deny the document, but the judge's cold, authoritative voice cut through the noise. "Silence, Mr. Pike. This court finds sufficient evidence of illegal water diversion and attempted felony arson, compounded by the attempted bribery of a public official." Pike's composure broke. He turned on Doyle, shouting, "You fool! You swore to me the verbal slip was his final undoing, an open confirmation of his guilt to the listening town." The verdict, delivered with a sharp, final thwack of the judge's gavel against a makeshift wooden block, felt like a thunderclap of freedom, the sound of the gavel as a bell of freedom. The judgment was clear. Coyote Well's overflow access must be immediately restored to the public creek system. Ezra Pike was ordered to pay restitution for the damages, and he was to be held for investigation into the arson and corruption charges. Ezra Pike, his face contorted in disbelief, was led away by two deputies. The community erupted in a quiet, weary cheer. June turned instantly to Cade, who was leaning heavily against a post, his wound still bleeding. The adrenaline draining away left him weak, but he offered her a victorious, pain-laced smile. June rushed forward, embracing him fiercely amidst the falling ash. The scent of smoke and sweat was heavy between them. She held him not as a savior, but as her equal partner in justice, in the view of the entire town. She did not kiss him passionately. Instead, she simply leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against his. A simple, profound touch of shared survival and love. "We won, Cade," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We stood our ground. June," he replied, his eyes filled with a fierce tenderness. The victory was steeped in loss, the charred, bitter remains of the diner floor, the sting of the bullet wound, the scattered remnants of their life. Ash falls onto the scorched edge of a baked roll, the bitter taste of loss, the sweetness of justice. Then, the true blessing. As the deputies led Pike away, the clouds that had threatened rain for weeks finally delivered. Not a downpour, but a small, gentle, persistent drizzle, the first rain of the season, washing the worst of the dust from the air and cooling the still smoldering ruins of the diner. It was a sign of natural renewal following the restoration of human justice. The smoke still clung to the air, but the scent of the first rain was already washing away the bitterness. Ezra Pike was gone, escorted out of Dry Creek, but the devastation he left behind was profound. Mallory's diner was badly damaged, the back wall charred, the roof partially collapsed. However, the victory had galvanized the community. Justice, they learned, was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of necessary rebuilding. Justice is not an end. It is the beginning of a community that knows how to stand together. The very next day, the townspeople, led by Ma Hollis and Letty, arrived with hammers, saws, and salvaged lumber. The poor cowhands, now free from Pike's tyranny, offered their labor and knowledge of sturdy construction. June, despite her exhaustion, directed the efforts with the same organized competence she applied to running her kitchen. Cade, his left arm heavily bandaged and slung, was officially useless for heavy lifting, but his eyes were sharp and his mind was engaged. He spent his days sitting on an overturned barrel, supervising the framing and teaching Rory the basics of carpentry, how to true a plumb line, how to set a foundation post deep. Rory, wearing his own small bandage like a badge of honor, found a deep pride in the work. Hammer striking nail with increasing confidence. The sounds of hammering, creaking scorpions, and boiling kettles are the slow, warm rhythm of daily life. The focus of June's rebuilding was singular, her dream. She used the court-ordered restitution money, combined with Cade's savings that she had faithfully kept, not just to rebuild the diner, but to expand. Her first legal act was to file the necessary paperwork to secure legitimate water rights from the now public creek runoff and to finalize the purchase of the land adjacent to the stagecoach stop. The new structure rose quickly. Sturdy and ambitious, a proper way station that included a small lodge and an expanded kitchen. It was to be called the Coyote Well Kitchen and Lodge. The name was a defiant testament to their fight. The new sign is painted with a windmill and a coffee cup, symbolizing the Coyote Well Kitchen. Cade's recovery was slow but steady. The wound forced him into stillness, a quiet patience that was foreign yet necessary. Once the initial danger passed, he returned to his true calling horses, unable to ride hard. He began teaching the local children the principles of safe horsemanship, using his prized, now gentled Mustang, Ash. The children paid him not with money, but with the warm cinnamon rolls and apple fritters. June baked a cozy, domestic scene of exchange that warmed June's heart. The biggest shift, however, was in the social landscape. The mean-spirited judgment of June's body and ambition evaporated in the face of her proven courage. No one in Dry Creek, not even the most conservative of the church ladies, dared to use the old, cruel nicknames. June Mallory was now consistently and respectfully addressed as Mistress June, or Madam Proprietor June. The theme of bodily respect and personal dignity had been ratified by her actions and the community's acknowledgement of her inherent worth. One afternoon, the delegation June had dreaded finally arrived. Mrs. Davies and two other prominent members of the Church Women's Aid Society. They stood awkwardly outside the half-finished lodge, looking contrite and hesitant. Madam Proprietor June, Mrs. Davies began stiffly, her eyes avoiding the lumber and the dust. We have heard much about your exceptional baked goods. Our charity event next week is struggling. We were wondering if you would be so kind as to perhaps share your recipe for the sourdough and the pecan rolls." June leaned against a new doorframe, her strong arms crossed over her chest. She saw the defeat in their eyes, the submission to her superior competence and character. She did not gloat. She simply smiled. A generous, genuine smile. "I'll do better than that, Mrs. Davies," June replied. "I will write down the recipe for you. It's half the ingredients, the flour, the yeast, the sugar. The other half is human kindness. And that, you have to contribute yourselves." June's gentle response completed the collapse of the social judgment. They had come begging for the physical recipe. She had given them the moral one. The ladies left, humbled but appreciative, signaling the complete dissolution of the local prejudice. Amidst the constant noise of rebuilding, the subtle, quiet bond between June and Cade deepened. They spent every evening sitting on the new porch, talking not about the past, but about plans, the type of flooring for the lodge, the best way to rig a pulley system, the placement of the bakery ovens. Cade had returned June's savings, but the emotional debt remained. He was ready for the future, ready to commit to this woman who was not afraid of the fire or the judgment. He often held the small leather pouch containing the savings he had entrusted to her, feeling for the single, crude silver ring he had asked the town blacksmith to fashion a simple, honest band he intended to use. But he hesitated. His struggle was internal. A man who had lived by fleeting contracts and the immediacy of the moment found it difficult to offer a vow of permanence. He wanted the time, the right time, when his shoulder was fully healed and the scent of fire was completely replaced by the scent of bread. The final element arrived in the mail, signaling the bridge to the future, a letter from the newly formed Territorial Railway Authority. It was an invitation to bid on the catering contract for the Cheyenne terminus. They were looking for a reliable, large-scale kitchen to supply quality meals to the rail workers. The opportunity was immense, a steady, secure revenue stream that would stabilize Dry Creek and ensure the lodge's future. But it required June to travel. Cade read the letter over her shoulder, his bandaged arm brushing her hair. "That's the kind of opportunity that saves a whole life." "June," he murmured. "It means weeks in Cheyenne, working with city contracts," June countered, her eyes wide with the scope of the chance. "I can't do that alone. I need someone to help me manage the logistics, the travel, the negotiations." The hook for the finale was set, a massive opportunity requiring both of them to leave the safe confines of Dry Creek and commit to a shared, mobile future. The air of Dry Creek on this final morning was cool and fresh, washed clean by the slow, restorative rain of the previous days. A sliver of sun crested the eastern mesa, casting long, peaceful shadows across the prairie. The new windmill, rebuilt and stronger, turned with a gentle, confident squeak. Its sound no longer desperate but rhythmic, the heartbeat of a healthy town. The new wooden structure of the Coyote Well kitchen and lodge stood proud and solid, smelling sweetly of fresh pine and hope. Cade, his shoulder now free of its sling though still tender, led June by the hand toward the original town well, the Coyote Well now legally restored and flowing freely. He carried a small piece of leather in his uninjured hand. "Before we talk about Cheyenne and contracts," Cade murmured, stopping at the well's stone lip, where droplets of clean water beaded and fell, "we need to talk about here, about us." He turned June to face the rising sun, placing his palms gently on her shoulders. He pulled out the leather pouch he had kept for weeks, opening it to reveal the crude, beautiful silver band he had fashioned with the help of the town blacksmith, a ring made not of precious ore, but of honest metal and careful labor. He took June's strong, flour-dusted hand. "I don't have many fancy words. June, I'm just a cowboy who tries to ride straight," Cade said, his voice earnest and quiet. "But I have the house we built, the water we fought for, and the promise I made in that dusty lumber shed when the world was coming apart." He slid the simple silver band onto her finger. "You asked who would catch you if you fell, and when you were afraid of being too much, I told you that to lose any part of your wonderful self would be to lose me first." Cade looked her directly in the eye, his gaze full of the hard-won respect and tender love that defined their partnership. "So, here's my promise. For all the days we have left, I don't care what you gain, what you lose, or what the world says you should be. You're my anchor. June, and you'd lose me first if you tried to change. Marry me, and let's keep what we found together." June did not hesitate. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, simple affirmation. This was a man who saw her strength and honored her substance. This was not love based on condition or appearance. It was love rooted in mutual respect and shared endurance. "Yes, Cade," she managed, her voice thick. "Yes, I will, not because your wound is healing or because the fire is out, but because we chose each other every day the fire was burning." Their kiss was simple, a sealing of the vow against the backdrop of their reclaimed landscape. The future immediately became clearer and brighter. They accepted the rail contract. Their path forward wasn't static. It was flexible and robust. They would spend 2 weeks each month in Cheyenne, supervising the railway kitchen bid, and 2 weeks back in Dry Creek, tending to the new lodge. It was a fluid, working marriage built on movement, partnership, and persistence perfect for the Western Territory. June walked back into the lodge, pulling on her apron. The kitchen, smelling of newly fired brick and baking yeast, was her sanctuary. She carefully opened her revived sourdough starter, the dough now thriving, and began the work of the day. June opens her oven, and a perfect round loaf rises. The perfect roundness of the bread symbolized the completeness of their journey. Meanwhile, Cade took a freshly framed piece of the Territorial Water Act, the document Ma Hollis had supplied, and mounted it with heavy nails on the wall of the new lodge's common room. It was the final symbol the law was not an abstraction, but a daily reminder of the fight for freedom and fairness they had won. Cade hangs the water law document on the wall, a permanent reminder. The last preparations for their journey were a flurry of warm, domestic activity. Ma Hollis and Letty stopped by. "So, you're dragging my June all the way to Cheyenne. Are you?" Foster Ma Hollis teased, sipping a cup of June's strong new coffee. "Make sure she doesn't burn down any more cities. You hear?" Cade chuckled, placing a protective hand on June's back. "She's running a kitchen. Ma Hollis, not a gunfight, though she handles either with equal competence." Letty helped June pack her bags, carefully folding the blue, fitted dress. "Remember what this dress means. June, they may have city clothes in Cheyenne, but you wear your own definition of beauty." Outside, Cade saddled Ash and then, with immense care, prepared a saddle for June. Rory stood by, tossing his cap high in the air in excitement for his mentors. June, now dressed in a rugged but tailored riding gear, walked confidently to her horse. She mounted smoothly, using the technique Cade had taught her, using her core strength and balance to become one with the animal. She no longer fought her body. She used it, honoring the engine of her resilience. As they rode out of Dry Creek, side by side, heading toward the bright, open horizon and the promise of the future, Rory waved until they were small dots against the vast expanse. The windmill at the Coyote Well spun gently, an icon of the community's spirit. The long cycle from thirst to rain, from isolation to community, from body shame to self-love, and from tyranny to justice was complete. Their love was not a conditional reward for becoming smaller, but an unwavering choice to stand together, exactly as they were, against every wind. Thank you for listening to this story of the Wild West. Please leave a comment below letting us know where in the world you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Wild West Tales for more stories, and press the hype button to help this tale reach more people.